اتمنى الكاميرا عندك شغاله. تيك بريك دقائق لين ما نطلع لايف ان شاء الله مره ثانيه. الله يحفظك. السلام عليكم، صباح الخير جميعا. بعدها ما استوت 11 بالضبط، لكن الناس توها بدأت تدخل، فبننتظر 5 دقائق تقريبا وبعدين بنبدأ إن شاء الله مع معالي مريم مهيري.
ما في مشكلة، عنا وقت، ما في مشكلة. أنا بس لازم أسألكم الصورة واضح؟ يعني I'm not cropped or something.
لا you are not cropped معاليك. Yes, all is good. الصوت واضح، الصورة ما يكون.
أوكي.
الله يحفظك. السلام عليكم مرة ثانية، الأخت حمدة، الأخ أحمد، الأخ أحمد سعيد، الأخت مريم البستكي، الأخت مريم بن حيدر، الأخت روضة، الأخت شيخة، زادي وخلفان. يعطيكم العافية جميعا. إن شاء الله دقائق قليلة وبنبدأ بإذن الله الواحد الأحد مع معالي مريم المهيري وأختنا فاطمة الملا من مكتب الأمن الغذائي كذلك. بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم، صباح الخير جميعا. بالنيابة عن معالي شمة وزيرة الدولة لشؤون الشباب، وبالنيابة عن معالي نورة الكعبي وزيرة الدولة لشؤون الثقافة، وبالنيابة عن سعادة سعيد النظري مدير عام المؤسسة الاتحادية للشباب وفريق العمل في المؤسسة الاتحادية للشباب، أو نقدر نقول في وزارة الثقافة والشباب. اليوم نرحب بمعالي مريم المهيري وزيرة الدولة لشؤون الأمن الغذائي. معالي مريم اليوم راح تاخذنا في رحلة أكثر من كونها جلسة عادية حول موضوع الأمن الغذائي من منظور عالمي إلى منظور محلي. أنا من الناس اللي يمكن من أيام الدراسة كنت أقول لما أفكر بمصطلح الأمن الغذائي أفكر بأن مخزون الغذاء على مدى يعني أعوام من الآن، لكن مصطلح الأمن الغذائي فيه أبعاد أكثر من مجرد المخزون الموجود اللي عندنا، أكثر من مسألة تعاون الدول ومنح لمخزونها لدول أخرى في حاجة لهذا الغذاء على سبيل المثال. فنترك المجال لمعالي مريم المهيري لهذا اليوم مع أختنا فاطمة الملا من مكتب معاليها للحديث حول موضوع الأمن الغذائي. حياك الله معالي مريم.
مشكورين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صباح الخير، صباح النور، السرور. Good morning everybody. And first of all, Congratulations to all of you. What a historical moment we had just a few hours ago. I'm sure many of you, just like myself, were up all night, cheering on the team and watching them basically make history. The Hope probe is now on its way to Mars. It's an achievement that truly inspires and motivates us all, that really nothing is impossible, that our ambitions quite literally reach for the stars. Thank you so much for joining me today. I, as many of you probably, stayed up all night, so being here this morning, thank you very much for your time, and yeah, for joining me in this introductory session of the Food Security for Youth summer camp program, and for committing time to understand our current food systems and our ambitions and how we hope to disrupt them. So my team and I, with many of our stakeholders, we have worked hard to put together an exciting summer program, as most of you will be staying here in the summer, covering many aspects of the food security file. I really want you to enjoy this program as you learn more about this really vital sector. And I'm sure many of you over the last few weeks have heard the word food security much more often than you did before, which shows how important and what an underlying basic need it is for any country. So we have sessions on AgTech, which is agricultural technology, where you will discover what foods are being grown currently in the UAE. For example, salmon, fish, delicious blueberries. They're grown now in the UAE all year round and available in the supermarkets. We also have sessions on nutrition and how the way we eat impacts our food security, and also insights on food waste, discovering future foods, and so much more. So all information about the sessions we have organized for you can be found on the Ministry of Culture and Youth's summer camp page. At this point, I would like to extend a huge thank you to my sisters, Her Excellency Noura and Her Excellency Shemma, and all their teams for putting this great summer program together. So I hope we inspire you to attend all the Food Security for Youth sessions that we have organized for you. And at the end, I hope you will become our ambassadors to change our food systems. Now, I would like to give you a general overview of the meaning of food security. But before we start, I just want to sort of inspire you a little bit. I often ask people, what do they understand when we talk about food security? As our brother mentioned just earlier on, some people think of agriculture, some people think of silos with food inside. So many think of different things when they think of the word food security. So if we go to the next slide, Fatma. So that the actual meaning of food security is when you enable citizens and residents of a country to have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food for an active and healthy life at affordable prices at all times, including emergency and crisis. So food security really talks about a person having access to food at all times. So going through the pandemic, which I will go into in a few slides later, it really shows that food security is not just in business as usual, but also when you're in a crisis. I want to mention something that you're going to see a lot in the news. A lot of people talk about self-sufficiency. Now, self-sufficiency and food security are different things. Self-sufficiency is when a country is able to supply its own food needs completely without any external assistance. Okay, and food security talks about the accessibility of food. So it's not necessarily the same thing. So I just wanted to highlight that because there is a lot of media buzz around self-sufficiency. So you try and reach a degree of self-sufficiency in order to achieve food security targets. So if we go to the next slide, let's look at the global landscape of when we talk about food security. Why is everyone talking about food security? Now, if you look at the population of the world and where we're heading towards, I'm sure a lot of you have heard that we're heading to the 9 billion population mark in a few years' time. And because we're going towards that number, we will be needing about 60% more food than we have now. Now, we're already struggling as it is with the resources that we have to grow food sustainably. Now imagine we'll need to be able to produce more food for more people. So we know that in future, this is going to become a challenge for us. Climate change makes it more and more difficult to grow food in a way that we've been growing for many years. So if you think of the temperatures, it's getting hotter. If you think of the acidity of the rains, for example, they're also changing. All this is making it harder for farmers to grow crops all year round. So they're having to use more chemicals, they're having to use more pesticides, and this is, of course, changing the quality of our food. So climate change is impacting how we are producing food. Water depletion. I mean, we in the UAE are a water scarce country, and many more countries are experiencing desertification and water depletion. And as you all know, in order to grow food, you need water. Food loss and waste is also a huge problem. We are wasting a third of the food being produced globally. So you think about this, this is huge. And yet at the same time, we have over 800 million people that go to bed hungry every day. So if we were just able to save 25% of what we waste, no one would have to go hungry. We go to the next slide, please. So after you see those global challenges, I always talk about we need to disrupt food systems. What do I mean by that? I'm talking about two kinds of systems. One is production, how we produce food. We need to change the way we're producing food. And the second system we need to disrupt is how we're consuming food. I mean, we're all guilty of this. We love fast, convenient food. We're not thinking much about the ingredients inside. For us, it's more about, okay, let's try something new quickly, but without knowing how much effort, how much work, how much water is being actually used to produce that food. And the worst thing that we do is we put a lot of edible food in the bin. You ask a child, I ask my own child, do you feel guilty putting half of your bread away in the bin? They don't feel guilty. And this is something wrong. They don't value and respect food. And this is something we have to do a lot of work on. So this is what I mean by disrupting food systems. So we need to disrupt the way we're producing food and disrupt the way we are consuming food. So if we go to the next slide. So in order to implement any actions, we need a plan, okay? Go to the next slide. So the plan is formally known as the National Food Security Strategy. Fatma, the next slide. There we go. So this is our plan. We tried to simplify it here for you. So we've got 5 strategic directions of the plan. As you mostly have heard, 90% of the food we consume in the UAE comes from outside. Okay, so we have 10% self-sufficiency. And with that, the number 1 strategic direction for us is to facilitate agribusiness and diversify food import sources. It's important to understand that even though the UAE wants to become less dependent on net imports to the country, we still want to be a hub of food trade. Because when you are a hub of food trade, you are always encouraging the flow of great volumes of food into the country and out of the country. And this also helps for the accessibility of food, okay? So we still want to become, we are actually a global hub for food trade, and we still want to keep that, enhance that, even though we want to be less dependent on what actually is net imported into the country. Second strategic direction is about how we can grow more food domestically using technology. And I'll talk about that in the slide after that. Reducing food loss and food waste is a strategic direction on its own. It's in line with the SDGs. We aim to cut our food loss and food waste by 50% by 2030. That's in line with the SDGs. And the UAE is one of the highest, actually it's in the top 5 food waste producers in the world. So we have a lot of work to do there. The fourth strategic direction is about food safety and about improving our nutritional intake. You probably have heard of the expression, you are what you eat, and it literally is correct. If we don't take care of what we're putting in our mouths, what we're feeding our body, we won't feel it now. We will feel it in a few years' time. The quality of life later on starts suffering. I don't know if some of you saw, it was a really great advert from Canada where you had an old man and you had his life taking care of himself, and then on the right screen, his life when he didn't take care of himself. And you see how he's enjoying time with his grandchildren, he's active, he's moving, and the other side is, of course, he has to take a lot of medication, is in the hospital a lot and cannot enjoy his grandchildren. And it kind of like said, which life do you choose? So I really like, there's a lot we need to do to educate ourselves on how we take care of ourselves. The fifth strategic direction is about being able to respond and being prepared for a crisis. And believe me, the last few weeks was a real test for us to see how well our programs were in the strategic direction. We go to the next slide. As you all know, when you have a strategy, you have the strategic directions and you have enablers, which cut across all the strategic directions. In order for us to be able to implement and drive this plan, we need a governance model, okay, which I'll go into after. We need to advance research and development. We cannot adopt technology if we don't do R&D. Research and development is there to be able to test things. We need to make mistakes to be able to learn from them, to become better. We also need a database. We, as politicians, cannot make any decisions unless we have a baseline, unless we have validated data which we can work on, because we always need to monitor ourselves. Human capacity, extremely important. I always say to many of you young ones, I'm not looking for the next farmer, I'm looking for the next agri-technologist. I want you to be excited about this sector. It's not what it used to be a few years back. It is really extremely exciting. People are farming now in the cities. Women are doing a lot of farming now. This sector has really catapulted in the last few years because of technology. And there's much we have to do in making sure your journey as a young person actually makes sense, and you know that at the end of the journey, you can actually yourself build a good quality life and make a good income. We also have the fifth enabler, which is, we call it the food movement. And it's basically about awareness, changing behavior of the people. You know, our culture and tradition is very much about when we have a guest, we want to open the dining table, put all kinds of dishes, and the more the merrier. But what we don't realize is that it's usually way too much food, and we need to learn that we can express our love and our welcome for the guests, maybe in just choosing 1 or 2 unique dishes instead of 10 quantities. So with that, that's the plan in a nutshell. If we go to the next slide. And remember, I was talking about how we can make sure that we drive the plan. So this is why we established the Emirates Food Security Council. This council, if we go to the next slide, it's made up of many different members. So all the ministries and local authorities, and we also have a youth representative. And basically all these members have a task or have an action that they do in the food security file. So we've met now several times with the council. We had an extraordinary meeting through COVID-19 discussing a lot of the action points we needed to do together. But this platform is really useful because it brings everyone together. We take a holistic approach when we take any decisions, because everyone usually looks at their own mandate and what they need to do. But when you're sitting with everybody, you listen and you have a look at certain decisions from different angles as well. So this council has been really fundamental and pivotal in moving the plan or the strategy forward. Next slide, please. So COVID-19, we all experienced it. March 11th, the WHO announced that the world is facing a global pandemic. I don't know how you guys felt, but seeing all the airplanes suddenly at the airport, not flying anymore, the skies were suddenly quiet, you could hear the birds much more often. For the food sector, it meant all the perishable foods. So perishable are fresh foods, so vegetables, fruits, meats, was suddenly not coming to the country anymore. And I'm sure many of you experienced getting pictures or seeing on social media supermarkets that had empty shelves. And you can imagine the panic, what people were thinking, that they thought, uh-oh, no more food. So my team and I, with all our stakeholders, we really worked tirelessly the weeks in March, April, to make sure that all the shelves in the supermarket were always filled. We worked tirelessly around the clock to ensure that people were, messages were brought out to say there's no need to panic. And as I said before, it was a time when we really tested how good our plan and our programs were. So we started monitoring the flow of food items at a more frequent rate at all the entry points of the country. We started accepting certifications electronically, so to avoid any food flow bottlenecks. We increased local food production. We worked with the retailers to increase market access of local production. We worked with the traders and importers to diversify food import sources, as many countries, you probably heard, were restricting exports of food. And one very, very important aspect that I need to mention at this point is our leadership. Brothers and sisters, you and I and all of us are blessed with the UAE leadership. Their dedication, support, vision, and leadership is endless. And they have been key to ensuring that food supplies are not disrupted. And they have been key to ensure calmness and serenity among the people. I'm sure a lot of you heard His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed's words, do not worry. Medicine and food will always be there for all of you. What more could you ask for, that the leadership is not only giving words, but actually taking actions as well in the background. So I cannot stress more how blessed we are with the leadership that we have. So going through COVID-19, as I mentioned, was a real test for us to see how good our programs were. And believe me, my team and I and the stakeholders, we learned a lot from these past few weeks. We also learned this from our leadership. Any crisis is also a time of opportunities to get better, to learn from, and we must, even though many suffered a lot of pain, and you mustn't forget the humane aspect of what we went through, but we try to always think, what positive things could we learn out of this to help us for next time? So some key success factors that we have really pinpointed on, if we go to the next slide, to ensuring that we're not just food secure today, but also in the future, is adopting technology. I'll give you an example. If I grow 1 kilogram of tomatoes traditionally outside in an open field, I will need about 250 liters of water. If I now grow the 1 kilogram tomato in a closed or a controlled environment, then I only need about 25 liters of water. You see the huge difference? This is why it's so important that we adopt technology. And we need to ensure that adopting technology, we adopt in a sustainable way. We have to always think of, we are a country that doesn't have a lot of fresh water, so we need to always think of the water, energy, food nexus, which means that everything we think about, it needs to be sustainable, and the natural resources need to be used properly. So if you go to the next slide, just want to show you a little bit about the exciting things of ag tech. So we've got controlled environment agriculture, which are known as CEAs. Okay, CEAs are basically closed systems. They can be anything from a net house, a greenhouse, a vertical farm, a high-tech horizontal farm. And we have quite a few here in the UAE. I'm not sure if you are aware, we've got tomatoes, vegetables, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries are all being grown using CEA systems. Advanced robotics is something that's also starting to advance more and more. Basically, this is all going into the direction of how we can grow clean foods more efficiently. Now, when I talk about clean foods, I'm talking about foods that can be grown without chemicals and without pesticides. And this is now what we consumers start looking at more. So I'm sure a lot of you think of organic farms. We want to make sure that the foods we eat are clean foods. Then we have aquaculture RAS. RAS are recirculating aquaculture systems. That's what it stands for. And in the UAE, we currently have 4 commercial RAS farms. Now, these farms are basically growing fish for us to eat. And aquaculture recirculating systems are also one of those high-tech systems that grow fish in a very small area, but extremely efficiently and extremely clean as well. So aquaculture is advancing in the UAE. In the world, 50% of the fish you eat comes from aquaculture system. If we look at the UAE, only 2% comes from aquaculture. So we still have great potential to advance this sector and grow. And so far we're growing salmon, sea bass, sea bream, hamor, shrimps. It's all being grown in RAS systems. So if we go to the next slide. I mentioned to you before that if we want to adopt technology, there is a need to advance R&D. I want you to look at this photo here. I don't know if when you look at this photo, does it freak you out? So this person is actually growing meat in a lab. Now, some people are like, no, for me, this is completely unnatural. But when you think about it and you think you actually can grow protein without killing an animal, without using huge amounts of land to make food for that animal to eat, you actually don't need much water. You don't need arable land. You only need a small lab, and you take either your plant cells or your animal cells from a live animal, and you just let them produce in a way they would produce by making sure they're in a closed like bioreactor. Just like yogurt is made in a fermenter, you're taking this bioreactor, you're putting the cells in, you're making sure that's oxygen, it's warm, it's getting some cells from plants, which is basically nutrients for the cells to be able to multiply. And at the end, you come out with your burger, your meat, your chicken nugget that you think has come from the animal. It tastes like it, the texture is like it, but it's actually either from a plant or a live animal. And this, brothers and sisters, is one of the future disruptors of foods. And believe me, I'm sure you heard of the Impossible Burger at Burger King. More and more will come into this sector. I've tried a few of these meats, and I was so surprised by how they taste. You wouldn't imagine that this burger was only made of plants, or this burger was made with animal cells, and you hadn't killed that animal either. So this is called it's called cellular agriculture. So agriculture from a cellular level, and this is something that is gonna disrupt the future of food systems. So I just want to sort of tease you a little bit on this, because we will have a session on this as well, and it would be really good to hear your thoughts on this. If we go to the next slide. So when you advance R&D, you need to make sure you have R&D facilities. So there is the Seawater Innovation Center. This is part of Khalifa University in Masdar City. Basically what this is, and I call it, so we have 3 S's in the UAE, that we're in abundance of 3 products or 3 things that start with S. We have the sun, we have the sea, and we have the sand. And we always think, what can we grow using those 3 things that we have in abundance? This Seawater Innovation Center does exactly that. It has a desert ecosystem, so using sand, not arable land. It's taking seawater, it's growing shrimp and fish, which is your protein. The wastewater from that goes into Salicornia. Salicornia is a plant that can live using seawater. And Salicornia basically produce seeds, and from these seeds you can make biofuel. And then that water goes into mangrove swamps. It gets cleaned. The mangroves suck in all the nutrients, and then they survive and thrive. And then that clean seawater goes back to the fish and shrimp. And all this is powered by the sun. So this pilot project is really one of a kind, where you're producing protein, you're producing Salicornia, which is your fuel, and it's all being powered by the sun using the sand and the seawater. And last year at the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, there was a flight that went from Abu Dhabi to Amsterdam, and it used a small percentage of this fuel in the flight. So it's definitely a project we're going to see expand and us dive into much more. The International Center for Biosaline Agriculture, also known as ICBA, has been around for 20 years now in the UAE. This is an international center focusing on what crops can be grown in marginal environments. And they do a lot of training for smallholder farmers and do a lot of training also in developing countries as well. Then we have the Marine Innovation Park, which is currently being built in Al Quwain, part of the Sheikh Khalifa Marine Research Center. MIP, which we call in short, is hopefully going to become the hub and the center of blue economy. So anything we can grow, any foods we can grow in the sea, aquaculture, so anything to do with the marine life on how we can support food security and environmental sustainability will be done here. So we hope to see many of you come and do thesis work or their PhD maybe, or some courses there to really go into the marine environment, and for us in the UAE to build the economy around this sector, which we felt was a sector that was a little bit, or didn't have the right infrastructure, was still a bit weak in being able to develop. So we're really excited about that. We hope by end of the year, beginning of next year, it will be operational. So we're working on that. And by the way, for any of you attending today, if you want to dedicate time to do some R&D, please do contact us directly and we will help you connect to these centers. So if we go to the next slide. Improving nutrition. This is also, so we talk now about supply, which is how we produce food. And now let's talk about us and how we're eating, what we can do in our behavior. So one of the, or let's say two main things we've done here in this sector is we worked with the Ministry of Health and Prevention on putting together a national guideline for nutrition for the UAE. So really a guideline that's dedicated to our culture, our environment, and what we like to eat. So that's available on the Ministry of Health's website. And it's also catered for different age groups. So we have for children, we've got for the elderly people, we've got for men, for women. Have a look there to sort of guide you on what we should be eating. Also, in January 2022, we will be, there's a national label that will come and become compulsory for products. So basically this label is a traffic light label, and it will help you decide whether you want to buy this product based on components such as the sugar level, the salt level, calorie, and the trans fats. So those are areas that we should be looking at. And as a consumer, I'm not a dietitian, but it will help me make better choices when I'm choosing a product. So this will become compulsory for the private sector in January 2022. Again, here there's a lot of work we need to do on awareness. We need to look into how we can develop more sustainable diets that will work in the way we like to eat and how our culture is here in the UAE. So there's a lot more to come on this. We go to the next slide. Yes, food loss and food waste. As I mentioned earlier, the UAE currently produces about 200 kilograms of waste per person per year. And that's more than double of the global average. Okay, so this is huge. And I tell you, it's really, I think it's, and alhamdulillah, we've been blessed with having food all the time and always having so many choices at home. And I think it's really time that we start thinking about maybe portion size and try and consciously think of not putting edible food into the bin. I think just taking a step and doing that, even with the children, will really help. Because as I said, if we could save just 25% of what we're wasting, no one would have to go hungry. If we go to the next slide, please. I think that is the end of the presentation. So I wanted to immerse you a little bit on the plan, on the importance of technology, on the research and development, because these are actually the three things that His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid told me when I first got the food security file. He said 3 things I needed to do, Mariam: a plan, adopt technology, and advance R&D. So I wanted to just make sure I give you an overview on that. I wanted to give you an overview on what I mean by disrupting systems. And if there's one thing that I would like you to take away from today's short introductory session, is to realize what a huge role your everyday actions, whether consciously or not, has on the food security file. From the choice you make on what food you buy, how much you eat, what you put in the bin, it hugely affects the food systems. So while the government will work a lot on how to adopt technology and enabling the private sector, it's up to you also to help. So we're trying to do a lot of work on the supply, but on the demand side, what you choose also makes a huge difference. So, and anyone who loves the thought of exploring food production using technologies, I really assure you the future of this sector is exciting and full of game-changing innovations. So I invite you to be part of this journey. And as I said in the beginning, we're aiming for the stars to be a world leader in innovation-driven food security. I wish you all to stay safe, enjoy, and be inspired, because you are the future leaders of tomorrow. And with that, my session is at the end. So thank you so much for having me.
معالي مريم, this was certainly inspiring. ما شاء الله ما شاء الله, يعني دخلتينا في معالم مختلفة, وام definitely end the next session إن شاء الله. بنرتب مع فاطمة الملا, وبإذن الله جميع الشباب يكونوا معنا. As you mentioned, يعني موضوع personal habits, daily personal habits, هذه راح تفرق كثير على مدى السنوات. يمكن it might be a challenge, لأن part of being generous is when we serve options of food on the platters ولا العزايم. بس بغض النظر, اعتقد ان في awareness صاير في المجتمع, والناس ان شاء الله راح تسعى لانها تحقق معاكم هذه الخطه باذن الله الواحد الاحد. شكرا جزيلا معالي مريم على
شكرا. مع السلامه.
شكرا. شكرا لكم شباب وبنات على متابعتكم لهذه الجلسه مع معالي مريم مهيري, ونشوفكم ان شاء الله قريبا في الجلسات الاخرى.